Pastor Joel with Right Response Ministries. Welcome to another episode of our podcast/show called Questions. Today's question is short and sweet. It is as follows. Should Christians support the death penalty? Should Christians support the death penalty? Now, there's a lot of biblical references that we could look at for this particular question, but let's go ahead and look at one in length, and I may reference a few others as I do my best to explain and answer this question from the Word of God. The text that I want to actually read for us is Genesis chapter 9. This is the Noahic covenant. This is after the flood waters had resided, and Noah and his 3 sons and their 3 wives and Noah's wife were now safely on solid ground and exited the ark. This is beginning with verse 1. Genesis chapter 9, verse 1 says this, "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." There we see the cultural mandate reinstated. So it's not just given to Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1, pre-sin, but even after sin and even after the flood. And God starting over with Noah. Once again, we see this cultural mandate to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you, this is verse 2 now, the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth, and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are delivered. So God given dominion, but different than when with Adam and Eve, they had dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air. But here they're given into the hand of Noah and all his offspring for the sake of eating. Verse 3 says, "Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And as I gave you the green plants," that's what God gave to Adam, "the green plants for food, I now give you everything." So every Christian should love the Noahic covenant, if for no other reason, simply because the Noahic covenant provides for us steak, meat. And so I'm very grateful for that. So meat is on the table for all people. That's verse 3. Verse 4 now. "But you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man. From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man." And here's verse 6. "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." Then verse 7, he continues and says once more, the cultural mandate, "And you be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth, and multiply in it." Verse 8, "Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, Behold, I establish my covenant with you and all your offspring after you." I'll stop there. The Noahic covenant is a common grace covenant. What I mean by that is it's not a special grace covenant given strictly or exclusively to the people of God. It's a common grace covenant given to Noah, who is the federal head in this instance. That is, he is the representative of all of humanity. So Noah's not just standing in for his family. He's not just standing in for the church or the people of God, Christians. Noah is standing in as the federal head, the representative of all of humanity. Himself and all his offspring, which would make up all the people of the earth, because Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their 3 wives are the only 8 people currently alive at this juncture. And so Noah is standing in as representative, and God is making a covenant with him and all his progeny, all of his offspring, that is each and every human being from that point on, all the way up until now. The new covenant that Christ makes is a covenant that he makes with his people. It's a special grace covenant. Hebrews says that Christ is the high priest, and he mediates the benefits of the new covenant by his blood. So Christ is mediating the benefits of the new covenant by his blood for his people, for those he died for the elect. And so the new covenant is particular to the church, but the Noahic covenant is not particular merely to the people of God, to those who follow Christ. It is for everyone. And in this covenant, we see a few things. We see the cultural mandate twice in verse 1 and 7. And so it is still God's intention that we be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. and exercise dominion over the earth. We also see that dominion, that authority that God has given to man over all the earth is, in the case of animals, it's no longer just a mere authority, but it's also that the animals have been given not just in subjection to man, but to be nourishment for man, to be his sustenance, to be a food source for him. So that's unique to the Noahic covenant. But then also we see God, after wiping out every single creature on planet Earth, other than those who were safely kept in the ark, we see God emphasizing to Noah in this covenant the immense value that he places on life. And it's important that God does this. It's right after he flooded the earth. It's right after ending the life, God ending the life of every living creature and every single human being other than 8 people, Noah and his family. And so God is now emphasizing, lest Noah or his sons or their wives misinterpret or misunderstand. God is emphasizing that all life, but especially human life, is of immense value in the sight of God. So it says, from every beast I will require it, and from every man, from his fellow man, I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Meaning that if the life of man is taken, there will be a reckoning. God will require the life of the one who takes a life. Verse 6, whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. And that's so important for us to understand. Basically what God is saying to Noah in this covenant that he's making not just with the church, but with all people for all times, until Christ returns, until there is no more murder. As long as there are murderers, for both Christians and non-Christians alike, this is a common grace covenant to all of mankind. God says that whenever someone kills someone else, the person who kills them, his life shall be required of him. And the word kill in this context means murder. There are justified killings. Just war theory is a thing. There are times where killing is justified, but this is murder. That is a wicked killing, an unjustified killing. Whenever a murder takes place, a person kills another person, the person who murders, the murderer, his life is demanded from him. And God says why. He explains why. For God made man in his own image. Whoever sheds the blood of man, verse 6, Genesis 9, by man shall his blood be shed. That means that his fellow peers, his fellow mankind, shall put him to death as the penalty. They shall put him to death. So whoever sheds the blood of man in an unjustified killing, murder, he will be justifiably killed by his fellow man, aka the penalty for the act of murder. For, that word for is important. It means this is the reason why. Why is there such a severe punishment? Why is somebody's life taken from them when they take the life from someone else? Because for God made man in his own image. See, according to God's logic, capital punishment, it doesn't detract from the sanctity of life. It esteems the sanctity of life. It's not because man is unimportant that we can enact capital punishment and kill someone who unjustifiably kills someone else, who murders. No, it's because man is so important. Because man is created in the image of God, and therefore upon him has been bestowed a unique dignity and value superior to all other earthly creatures, all other earthly life. Because man has this unique dignity, and because he was made in the image of God, his life is immensely valuable. And how do we esteem the value of a man's life? By putting to death anyone who would dare murder him. So capital punishment is God's idea for esteeming the sanctity of life. So when you hear some leftist liberal and their ridiculous jargon and rhetoric saying, Well, Christians are pro-life and anti-abortion, but they're for capital punishment, so they can't really care about the sanctity of life. That is such a faulty argument. It's such weak argumentation. I mean, their argument is literally this: because Christians don't think children should be murdered in their mother's wombs, they also shouldn't think that people should ever be killed, as though they're synonymous, as though it's a 1-to-1 ratio. Right? There's something radically different about a child being murdered in their mother's womb versus a murderer being put to death because he murdered someone else. So capital punishment, the death penalty, is not the belittling of the sanctity of life. It's saying because man is so precious in the sight of God and made in God's image with unique dignity and value, the only way to esteem that value and honor it properly is to put to death anyone who would murder an image-bearing creature. So, the death penalty is the esteeming of the sanctity of life, not the detracting from the sanctity of life. And the reality is, statistically, it's been proven time and time again at just a social level that states and locations and cities and places that uphold the death penalty, there are typically, statistically, a lower rate of murder because it acts as a deterrent. People are less likely to murder someone else if they know that by committing murder, they are forfeiting their own life. And so that penalty, it's not because we don't care about people, it's because we do care about people. And one of the ways that you ensure the protection of people made in the image of God is you don't threaten, but you rather promise very severe punishment for anyone who would ultimately despise the life of a fellow person. It's kind of like what Paul writes. I believe it's 1 Timothy chapter 5, when he says, if an elder persists in sin, rebuke him in the presence of all, so that the rest may stand in fear. Or Old Testament texts in the Pentateuch say that whenever justice is not swiftly carried out, the people rebel. But wherever justice is swiftly carried out, there's order restored. Meaning that when someone does something criminal and gets away with it, or is perceived to have gotten away with it, or got a lesser penalty, a slap on the wrist, that promotes that criminal action to take place at a much higher degree. And so because we don't want people to die, because we do esteem the sanctity of life, we place God's penalty. It's not man's invention. God's penalty for murder on that criminal and sinful action. And I think it's really valuable when a murderer is not only put to death, but I think we can make a biblical argument that should be done in some kind of public capacity, where the public sees the murderer put to death. The last thing I'll leave you with, which is a bit controversial, but one of the reasons a murderer must be put to death is because, in biblical terms, what else would you do with them? They're too dangerous. Somebody who's willing to take somebody's life, they're too dangerous to let back into society. And so you might be thinking, yeah, you put them in jail. Well, in biblical terms, there are no jails. Now, I understand in Rome there were jails where the apostles were imprisoned. But for Israel, God's covenant people, in the Old Testament, prison wasn't a thing. If you steal, you don't go to jail, right? Because then you're just stealing from people twice, right? The thief steals from an individual, and then the civil authorities steal from everyone by taking their taxes to support the prison system, right? So we don't solve theft with more theft. If you steal, the consequence is double restitution, right? It's also not cutting off a hand. No, because he needs that hand. The thief needs the hand. Why? because he needs, biblical terms, he needs to learn to work with his own hands to provide for himself. Let the thief no longer steal, but work with his own hands. So he needs his hands to work, not only to provide for his own needs, but also to make restitution to the one that he stole from. Double restitution, right? They're getting it back with interest. And so if someone steals, the penalty isn't jail. It's not prison. It's double restitution. And if they can't pay double restitution, then it's slavery. And even in our society, I know it's crazy, but that could be done. It wouldn't be slavery in the way that you and I think. It wouldn't be the African slave trade. It wouldn't be race-based. It'd be based on crime, and it wouldn't be that this person's chained to a wall in your house to cook for you for the next 10 years. No, it would be like, paying child support. It'd be like siphoning that person's wages for a time until they make double restitution. They can't afford to pay it in one lump sum, and so their wages are going to be siphoned. And if it's going to take 10 years based on their income and all those kinds of things, then maybe instead of double restitution, because it's going to take longer, it's triple restitution or quadruple restitution to keep up with inflation or the markets. Or you can do it, right? It's case law. It's the general equity of civil law being applied in our society today. It can be done. We can obey God's law. We really can. So throwing people in jail, that's not a thing. I think that actually takes away from the dignity of humanity. People aren't pets. They're not pets. That's what we do with people in prison, right? They have their little kennel, and you give them a little bowl of food and a little bowl of water, and you let them go for a walk on a leash outside and have some rec time. You're treating people like pets. And people want that. We're so far gone from God's good design and God's law that people want universal income. Right? You're a pet. You're a pet of the state, or you're a pet of the judicial system if you're in prison. People aren't pets. That's degrading. That's dehumanizing. That detracts from the sanctity of life. So we don't make people pets, and we certainly don't make the rest of society that hasn't done anything wrong pay for the pet. We don't punish society. We punish the criminal, the one who broke God's law, the one who did wrong. So if it's theft, there's a way besides jail to make that right. If it's an injury, right? Well, it's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. And if it's murder, it's life for a life. Not because we think low of human life, but because we think incredibly high of human life, because of the sanctity of human life. Because, most importantly, that's what God tells us to do. And Jesus in the new covenant does not override or abrogate or abolish the Noahic covenant. The Noahic covenant is a covenant to all people in all places in all times. It's a common grace covenant. And the covenant that Christ makes with the church is great. But here's the thing. You might say, well, Jesus says turn the other cheek, or Jesus says to forgive, or, let's forgive as God forgives our debts, let's forgive our debtors. The last thing I'll say, it's important. What we're talking about with the death penalty is we're talking about what the state should do. We're not talking about personal vengeance. Right? So you might say, well, that's not what Jesus says in the New Testament. That's not what the New Testament says to Christians. Yeah, but that doesn't contradict this. Again, this is a common grace covenant given to humanity for how societies should function. So who should actually carry out the death penalty? The civil state. Right? That's what Romans 13 says, and that's the New Testament, New Covenant, Romans 13. It says, would you have no fear of the one who rules over you? Then do what is good, for he does not bear the sword in vain. God has given to the state, not that just the handcuffs, not the jail cell, not just the tickets and the fines, the sword. So God has given to the state the sword to fight threats abroad, but also to punish the evildoer domestically, here, and to put to death those who take the life from someone else. So the New Testament, everything that Jesus says about forgiveness and showing mercy and turning the other cheek, that's how Christians should conduct themselves when we're wronged. That has nothing to say with what the civil state of a society should exact as the penalty for a crime. There's a difference between sins and crimes. Crimes are punished by the state. We're not vigilantes. No citizen, Christian or not, is a vigilante. So we don't have the jurisdiction to exact penalty on those who commit crimes, but the state does. God has given them that jurisdiction. He's given them those rights, that authority, that responsibility, and he's given them the sword. The sword. And that's all New Testament. And so this is a common grace covenant, Genesis chapter 9. Noah is standing in as the federal head representative, not just of the church, but of all humanity. And God says that even though he's just ended the life of every living creature on the planet, except for those who were safely in the ark, God wants to ensure that Noah and his family understand that God loves life and that we should love life, and that one of the ways that we esteem the sanctity of life is by ending the life of anyone else who would commit murder. And when I say we, I don't mean the church, I don't mean you listening, or I mean we as a society and the sphere, sovereign sphere of human society that has been given that responsibility and that role and those rights is the civil state. So yes, the state should carry the death penalty for murderers. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching this video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, we hope that you'll take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can watch more content like this. Also, take a moment and give this video a like so that it can reach more people, and take a moment and click on the bell so that you'll be notified whenever we come out with new content. Thanks so much. God bless.